Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2018 District 30 Idaho State Representative Debate. My name is McKenna Lewis, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies for the evening. We would like to thank you all for coming, and we hope that this debate will inform you of the candidates' views and help you to make an informed vote during the upcoming election. We would like to ask that you are courteous throughout the entire debate as the candidates are speaking. I would like to thank the students in the senior government class here at Compass Academy. They are the reason this debate is happening. Everything from stage design, running the camera, lights, and sound, advertising, and creating the questions has been done by the students. We would also like to thank the candidates that were so willing to come and participate in this debate. Now, I would like to introduce our candidates. Everyone, please welcome Mr. Gary Marshall. Mr. Marshall is a lifelong resident of Bonneville County and has worked in Idaho Public Schools for 12 years, as well as Brigham Young University, Idaho, for 27 years. And because of this, he believes in passionate teachers in Idaho's schools. He is a strong supporter of religious and economic freedom, and if elected, he will support conservative values and work for common sense solutions to issues. Now, please welcome Mrs. Pat Tucker. Mrs. Tucker believes in fair and representative government and also believes in high-quality education. As a woman, Mrs. Tucker believes that women in Congress bring family values into government. She wants the government to address the issues that the people are most passionate about. Thank you both again for being here tonight. Now, I would like to introduce the students sitting at the table in front of you. Our timekeepers for tonight are Aiden Montgomery and Ryan Gillespie. And our moderator is Lauren Cannon. Lauren, the time is now yours.
We will alternate who starts the question. You have 2 minutes to answer each question. The green light means you have 2 minutes or less. It will turn to yellow when you have 15 seconds remaining, and the red light means your time is up and I will cut you off. In the interest of political civility, please refrain from attacking your opponents. And now for our first question. Candidates, both of you are running for office as an Idaho representative for the first time. What motivated you to run for office? Candidate Tucker, the question is yours.
First of all, I would like to thank all of the Compass Academy students for hosting this debate, which is so important for our ability to be informed voters, but I certainly hope it encourages at least some of you to enter into politics. We need your direct, firsthand experience and your ideas. I was motivated to run in this race because of my desire to make this campaign your campaign, which it really is. I represent all Idahoans. I represent our friends, our neighbors, my INL colleagues, our teachers, our students, each and every one of you. The first plank of my platform is a brighter, safer future for our youth. This means that I give you my heart, 1,000% of my commitment, so that you can be optimistic about your future, so that you can be alive at 25. When Idaho students succeed, Idaho succeeds. Compass Academy has a special place in my heart. In 2016, the Katie Tucker Run in the Spirit, which I founded after my own daughter was killed at age 11, donated the automated external defibrillator to this school. Now what that does is give someone who has sudden cardiac arrest, a heart attack, a second chance at life. That is a metaphor for this campaign. I want everyone in Idaho, all of you students, teachers, everyone to have the opportunity to reach your potential, to have a second chance at doing so, because when we have productive people, when we invest in the education and health care of our people, our state benefits, each and every one of us benefits. Does that mean my time is up?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Candidate Tucker.
Thank you very much.
Candidate Marshall, the question is yours.
I'm excited to be back in this building. I was in the first class of Clary Gale students who came to this junior high when it was brand new. So I was here for 3 years, very first class that did that. I've been involved in education during my public career. I taught and was an administrator in School District 91. I taught at Bonneville High School. I taught American government and American history, was involved in the Gifted Talented program in its beginning years, way back in the 1970s, started the advanced placement program at Bonneville High School. As an administrator, I was involved with the special education. Spent 27 years up at BYU, Idaho, Ricks College when I started there. I love the people of Idaho. I've always wanted to serve in the Idaho legislature. I felt like it was important for me not to do that when I was teaching, because I taught government and American history, and I thought it was important that I stay kind of aloof from politics. But now it's an opportunity for me to serve. I've tried to have a broad experience. I think I do bring a full life's broad experience to this task. Ramona and I have 7 children, married here in Idaho. We have 38 grandchildren. I have a vested interest in keeping this place a beautiful and safe place. I'm passionate about a lot of things. I've been involved in agriculture. I spent 2 years working at the INL at Test Area North. And I think I bring a lot of experience to this. I consider myself a constitutional scholar. I spent my professional career studying the Constitution. Grateful to be here, grateful for the young people who have organized this. It's a great thing.
Thank you, Candidate Tucker. Marcia, sorry. Now for our next question. Recent mass shootings have reignited the national conversation about gun violence. However, in Idaho, the issue isn't gun homicides, it's gun suicides. For example, in 2010, out of the 199 firearm deaths in our state, 183 of those deaths were suicides. In general, Idaho has one of the highest suicide rates in the country, and the most common method of suicide is by firearm. What can we do to make suicide by firearm less prevalent in Idaho? Candidate Marshall, you may begin.
Well, I think the most important question would be, what can we do to make suicide less prevalent, whether it's by firearm or by any other means. Our suicide rate is of deep concern to all of us. We've got to strengthen our homes, our families. In our educational pursuits, we need to empower students with knowledge. We need them to feel like they're doing something of value. We need to strengthen our churches, our community organizations. We need to encourage young people to be involved in all of those things. Obviously, the issue of guns, guns kill people. Guns protect us. They're sometimes used inappropriately. I don't think that controls on guns are going to influence the suicide rate. We've got to work at the other things, the community issues, the educational issues, the things that make young people feel important, that make them feel proud, that make them feel like they've done something. When they know things, they feel empowered. I've experienced that many times at the college level. Young people who come and they know things, they feel empowered to be part of a conversation, to be part of a group, to contribute. All of those kinds of things, I think, will help us with this suicide thing. Certainly strengthening families is first and foremost in my mind.
Thank you for your response. Candidate Tucker, your response.
Thank you. This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart. I feel very deeply a connectedness with the Marjory Stoneman Douglas parents, the parents in Texas, the children there, because frankly, I have experienced the permanent loss of a child. Teen suicide is an epidemic in eastern Idaho, in Idaho as a whole. The leading causes of death are highway fatalities and gun violence, most of them from suicide. Idaho has a 57% higher suicide rate than the national average. We need to, than the national average. We need to look at this and form a task force on a statewide basis at the legislature to determine the causes of suicide and what we can do about them. From 2017 to this year, we had 4 teens commit suicide at Bonneville High. We had one 12-year-old commit suicide at Taylor Crossing. We have had 26 suicides from here to Twin in the past since 2017. This is an epidemic. We need to look at it. It doesn't only affect our youth. Part of the reason is because we have had a lack of investment in our people in education and healthcare. We have had people feeling dismal about their future. The Republican Party has been, of which my opponent is a member, in charge for 60 years and not invested adequately in education. I am the champion of adequate funding for education. The Republican Party has driven the school bus to the bottom of the canyon and Idaho education to the bottom of national rankings. This has an integral role in the lack of optimism of our people. We need to change that. I am the candidate of change. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. For our next question, some Idaho voters feel that the campaigns for Proposition 1 have been misleading on both sides, leaving many confused and uninformed about what Prop 1 actually does. Are you for or against Prop 1, and how do you think it would affect the state if it were to pass? Candidate Tucker, your response.
Proposition 1, in my opinion, is against the Constitution of our state. A very small percentage of the profits of Proposition 1 would go to education, only 1%. That is a totally inadequate amount. I think it encourages the wrong values. I think Idaho values are, let's invest in our people, let's invest in education, let's invest in healthcare. I don't think we should be promoting gambling, which typically hits the people who can afford it least. It becomes an addiction. We've seen what has happened with opioid addictions. That has been a major role in teen suicide. We need to discourage wrong behaviors and get our people excited about being fully productive with contributing to our state. Proposition 1 has been sold as not slot machines, but it's very, very close to that. It's against our Constitution. I'm opposed to it. I think we need to focus on Proposition 2 very carefully, which is a great thing for every single Idahoan to be able to have health care. Proposition 1 is special interest, and we've seen that long enough with the Republican Party. We need to promote activities and laws that help each and every Idahoan, not special interests.
Thank you. Candidate Marshall, the question is yours.
I too am opposed to Prop 1. The Idaho Constitution makes it very clear that things that simulate or are like slot machines are not allowed under our Constitution. The machines that they use under what would be legalized under Prop 1 very much look like slot machines, act like slot machines, really are slot machines. I don't think it's appropriate for government to prop up an industry, which I think could make it back on its own. I think if those who want horse racing want the industry to thrive, there's a wonderful thing about competition and free enterprise. It sort of sparks a genius. When you get the government involved, it kind of suppresses that genius and that enterprising spirit. I think let's just encourage those who want horse racing, put their thinking caps on. They can make this thing work, and they don't have to be propped up with the instant racing machines that they're proposing. So I'm totally opposed to it. It certainly won't give enough money to education to make that a reason at all to vote for it. I would encourage you to vote against Prop 1.
Thank you for your response. Our next question. Proposition 2 presents the option to expand Medicaid coverage to an estimated 62,000 Idahoans who currently do not qualify. Do you support this initiative, and why do you believe that your stance on this issue is the best choice for Idahoans? Candidate Marshall, you may begin.
I've I've made it pretty clear throughout my entire campaign that I've supported the idea that the Idaho legislature should have done something with the Medicaid gap a long time ago. In that way of saying it, I'm totally committed. If the people of Idaho next week approve Prop 2, I'm totally committed in the legislature to fund it appropriately, to do everything we can to make it work. If the people of Idaho vote against Prop 2 next week, I will still work hard in the legislature to find a solution to the Medicaid gap. We are not treating people equally under the law because of the Medicaid gap. It's a problem that's been created by the federal government, and it's very, very, very difficult for states to resolve the problem because of how it was created by the federal government. States can't really solve it very easily without spending a lot of money. But we got to do something, and I'm committed to doing something. Let's let the people of Idaho vote next week, and I'll support funding if it passes. I will work hard to fill the gap if it doesn't pass.
Thank you.
Let me say this. Accountability is the cornerstone of our democracy. I have been making attempt after attempt to get Gary to say whether he voted or will vote for Proposition 2 Medicaid expansion. Now, this is a critical issue indicating his mindset, his commitment to Medicaid expansion. He has said he won't stand in the way of the people, that something needs to be done. Well, the Republicans have had 6 years to do something about Medicaid expansion and done absolutely nothing, while an average of one person a day dies in Idaho because of lack of health care coverage. I, in this race, am the absolute champion of Medicaid expansion. I carried the petition, I voted for it, I support it with my heart, and I want to establish a task force to have Medicaid expansion ready to implement on January 1st of 2020. We need to know where Mr. Marshall stands in terms of his vote. It is our business once he becomes a candidate for the legislature. Governor Little told us that he was going to indicate his vote. I have told you I voted for it proudly. It is critically important for Idahoans to have health care coverage. We know of people, each and every one of us know of someone who has put off health care. My sister, your parents probably, I'm sure each and every one of us knows of a tragic story of someone who has been bankrupted because of cancer, who can't pay medical bills. That affects our futures. And for students, you will be facing this issue if you're not already. If you are lucky enough to have parents who have health care coverage, then you have health care. Some of your students don't have health care coverage. That's not fair. We need to make it right.
Thank you for your response. Our next question. As we polled the community, a common concern of District 30 citizens was the use of taxpayer money. How would you describe your tax priorities, and what would you say to reassure your constituents that you will be fiscally responsible? Candidate Tucker, you may begin.
I think this is a great question. We need to be very aware of using taxpayer dollars. My priorities are twofold. First, we need to get Medicaid expansion covered. If it doesn't pass on the ballot, we need to pass it in the legislature and do the same thing, which we've needed to do for a very long time. And we need to look at the fiscal responsibility of doing that. Idaho and its legislature has turned away $400 million a year by not expanding Medicaid. If we expanded Medicaid, we could have an influx of $4 billion over 10 years for our legislature. The fact that we are not getting this is a broken system. It shows, it demonstrates in clear and certain terms that we are not having the life experience, the tragic experience of our people reflected in our laws. We need Medicaid expansion. Second priority, early education. Early education pays for itself sevenfold. We need to look at student loans. We need to make sure that we fund the opportunity scholarships for all of our students. We have students who are trusting our government when they apply for scholarships to get them, and they're being told, sorry, we don't have the money to give you the scholarship we promised. We need to invest in our education. I would put the first priority as early education. It pays for itself. Only half of our kindergartners are entering kindergarten at grade level. Only 20% of Idahoans go to preschool. Idaho is only one of 6 states that doesn't provide 1 cent for preschool education. Our students are starting behind before they even begin kindergarten. We can't have that. Our students deserve much better than that. The Republican legislature has failed our students. We need change.
Thank you, Candidate Tucker. Candidate Marshall, the question is yours.
Well, the first thing I would say is that I do want to be fiscally responsible. Pat talks about a lot of things, and she doesn't admit to the fact that resources are limited. We pride ourselves on keeping taxes as low as possible. We're taxed at multiple levels and by multiple means. We pay sales tax, we pay income tax, we pay property tax, we pay state income tax, we pay federal income tax. Folks, there's a tax burden, a collective tax burden that's significantly high in this country. We have to be very careful and cautious that the taxes do not diminish industry and commerce and business in their attempts to make a profit and to do the kind of things that we want to do to create jobs and create the kind of economic atmosphere that we need. So I pledge to you to be fiscally responsible, to make sure that we spend within our means in Idaho. It's required by our Constitution. We can't spend ourselves into debt, and we shouldn't spend ourselves into debt. It's a national tragedy that we're $21 trillion in debt at the national level. We cannot do that here in the state of Idaho. So leadership in the legislature, it's a very hard thing to look at the resources and make decisions about where you want to put them. I want to pay teachers more, but we can't have early childhood education, pay teachers what they deserve right now without breaking the budget. We can't do all of these things. Medicaid expansion is going to cost us a lot of money. I will do everything I can to fund it appropriately, but it has to be done responsibly, and it has to be done within the means that we have to make it work. I'm committed to keeping taxes as low as we can and working for good solutions.
Thank you for your response. Our next question. Over 60% of Idaho is public lands. What do you think is the biggest threat to this land, and what do you think is the best solution to protect it? Candidate Marshall, you may begin.
We lived with this public land thing for a long time in our history. Over 130 years ago, we were made a state, and the federal government decided to keep 60% of Idaho. Folks, I want to protect our public lands. Ramona and I love to be out and about in our public lands. I'm not in favor of turning everything over to the state. I do think that the state could play an important and increasing role in the management of our public lands. I think that our public lands need to be managed so that in many cases resources can be extracted. We're very, very conscious about the environment today. We can extract resources from the environment in ways that we could not have conceived of doing it in the 1800s and 1900s. We're much more responsible that way. Our public lands need to be used. They need to be used for grazing, for natural resources, for lumber, timber products. We need to protect those public lands. The state of Idaho needs to have a greater say in the management of those public lands. I feel that that's an important issue we can work for. You will never get the Congress of the United States to give up the public lands in Idaho to the state of Idaho. I don't think that's going to happen. That's not a realistic thing. But getting them to agree to let Idaho help manage the public lands, that's a realistic thing, and we ought to work for that. I want to protect our public lands, bottom line.
Our public lands are critically important to our economy, to our livelihood, many of us, for tourism, for our spiritual health, for our exercise. We need to have vision for protecting our public lands. Climate change needs to be studied, needs to be looked at. We cannot continue on this track of an increasing threat of forest fires destroying our public lands. We need to keep them managed by the federal government and owned by the federal government to be shared with each and every Idahoan and the rest of the country that comes and spends money in our great state. We need to understand that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN, just recently came out with a study and said that we have 12 years to figure out what to do about climate change before we have catastrophic effects. That's 12 years to figure out what to do about protecting our public lands. They must be, we need to think about Idaho's role in climate change, what we can do, what we can do in terms of helping our people. Climate change is a very real issue, and we certainly need to keep it in our curriculum so that students can understand climate change, learn about it, and bring their creativity to address the issue, the problem, and help us find a solution. We need to keep our public lands protected at all costs. We have had 41% of our state endowment lands sold off. We need to assess the value of public lands over time. Currently, the Constitution requires us to sell off public lands to make the most profit to go to education. We should look at the value of public lands over time, because over time, that means keeping our public lands in public hands, accessible to all and available for tourism to improve our economy.
Thank you for your responses. Our next question. As of April 6th in the state of Idaho, you are now legally allowed to alter your birth certificate to reflect your gender identity. Do you think that more laws involving...
You need to speak just a little bit clearer. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
As of April 6th in the state of Idaho, you are now legally allowed to alter your birth certificate to reflect your gender identity. Do you think that more laws involving gender identity and sexual orientation should be made in order to protect the rights of LGBTQ Idahoans? Candidate Tucker, you may begin.
In this race, I've made very clear that I am the champion of adding the words to the Idaho Constitution and the Idaho Human Rights Act. We must have gender identity and sexual orientation as parts of our Constitution, so that someone who's working, who has a photograph of a same-sex marriage on his or her desk, can't be hauled off and fired for that, because that currently is not allowed, because we don't have constitutional protection, whereas someone who has a heterosexual marriage can have all manner of display. And we need to make sure that we have fairness. I am the champion of equal protection under the law for all Idahoans. It's the way it needs to be. In our last debate, Mr. Marshall would not commit to supporting Add the Words. His party and his website talk about the importance of a traditional marriage between a man and a woman. I believe that happiness should prevail here, and the government should not have a hand in whom any of us decides to marry, to have a relationship with. That is our private business. In our last debate, Mr. Marshall said that equal rights for women could present culture change that could be a problem. I believe that equal rights for all Idahoans is mandatory and so important for our students to know that each of us is valued equally and that we all have the same fairness and opportunity to fulfill our life goals. We must have this. The Equal Rights Amendment, for those of you who don't know, are young people, passed in Idaho in 1972. In 1977, it was rescinded. Probably that rescission is not going to be honored. But we are talking about someone who is reflecting viewpoints that are decades old. We need someone who is not ill-informed and outdated. Thank you.
Well, I don't think my position is ill-informed and outdated. Folks, let me address the issue of Title 18 of the Idaho Code. Title 18 of the Idaho Code uses the words that we don't discriminate on the basis of race, color, creed, sex, or national origin. The word creed means a set of beliefs that guides your behavior. The word creed is used in the courts of law today in that broad context. We do not need to add the words sexual orientation or gender identity because they're already covered under the law. I'm not in favor of adding the words because I'm in favor of keeping laws simple, clean, straightforward. That's what I stand for in terms of the law. And that's why I'm opposed to adding those words. We don't need them. I'm in favor of equal protection under the law. I believe that people are accorded equal protection under the law. There are always mistakes made. We're human beings, and sometimes mistakes are made. But every time someone says there ought to be a law against that, that's not the answer sometimes. Because if we jumped and made a law against that, every time someone asked for it, we would be so burdened by law, we would lose our freedoms. I'm in favor of equal protection under the law. I want to make that perfectly clear. I'm in favor of traditional marriage. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm a student of history. Nations in the world have brought the judgments of God upon them. I believe in God. I believe that there's truth. I believe in natural law, as our founders believed in natural law. It's important for nations to discuss rights and wrongs, not just rights, in order to stay civil. I'm for equal protection of women. I don't know where Pat's getting her information, but I don't feel the way she characterized me about women.
Thank you for your responses. Our next question. 50% of violent crimes in Idaho result in an arrest, unlike sexual assault crimes where only 25% result in an arrest. Why do you think that this rate is so low, and what can be done at the state level to better protect victims of sexual assault?
I think this is a very important issue. I think it has to do to a certain extent with our culture. I think Gary does represent a culture that isn't as evolved as I wish it were, and I think we need to really look at that for you students to make sure that your futures are as bright as they can be. I personally don't believe that having 38 grandchildren is a qualification necessarily for the legislature. I think it's a great thing. I think it's much more important to have the view of helping every Idahoan and listening to the life experience of Idahoans, including the LGBTQ community, which has stated very clearly that the words are necessary. The Equal Rights Amendment, I feel as a woman that it's necessary to make very clear that we do have equal rights. When you're on the outside, when you're marginalized, the words matter, the laws matter, not the vagueness. You want the explicit clearness of fairness for all of our people. That is critically important. I think there's also perhaps a connection with a lack of separation of church and state. At our last debate, Gary said that we have freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. If he means this, bear in mind, this is a totalitarian thing to say because the Establishment Clause of our Constitution prohibits the establishment of a religion. We have free exercise of religion. James Madison, who was a preeminent author of our Constitution, said that we are allowed not to exercise a religion. That has been proved by the court and in precedent. We are free to have religion, free not to have religion, and I think all of these issues are related to a lack of enforcement of sexual assault and violence. We need to uplift our women and listen to them.
I want you to repeat the question again.
50% of violent crimes in Idaho result in an arrest, unlike sexual assault crimes where only 25% result in an arrest. Why do you think that this rate is so low, and what can be done at the state level to better protect victims of sexual assault?
Well, sexual assault, it is a problematic thing, and it involves a lot of issues here. When there's sexual assault, there's accusations made, there's denials made. It's tougher to get a conviction in sexual assault. It's just, I want people to be treated equally under the law. I want people to be able to come forward without fear to make accusations. I want sexual abuse to be, and sexual assault to be treated as it should be, and everybody should have their opportunity to make the accusations. People should have their opportunity to defend the accusations. That's a guiding principle. So it's a difficult issue. It needs to be carefully assessed. There are a lot of reasons probably why we're not getting more convictions, but part of it is it's just a very difficult thing to prove, and it's a very difficult thing to deal with. I think I would like to address this issue of freedom of religion. Folks, the founding generation, I understand clearly what the founding generation meant when they said freedom of religion. Freedom of conscience is the concept. You are free to worship God according to the dictates of your own conscience. If a person does not believe in God, they are free to do that as well. That's covered under freedom of religion. That concept is enormously important to America. Everybody in America should be able to express their opinions, religious or non-religious. They should be treated equally on the public square under that principle of freedom of religion. It is not freedom from religion. That's not the concept. That turns the concept on its head. And it would be a very, very dangerous thing for us to accept that concept, freedom from religion. It's not that. It's freedom of religion. Everybody should be able to express their opinions. Thanks.
Thank you for your responses. Our next question. A recent article in the Idaho State Journal shows 79% of Idahoans favor some form of medical marijuana. Do you support medical marijuana use in our state, and how would this influence your legislative actions? Candidate Marshall, you may begin.
Yeah, I would just say as clearly as I can, I support medical marijuana prescribed by a doctor in specific dosages. I should talk about the derivatives of marijuana that are being used for medical purposes. They need to be prescribed clearly, specific dosage from a licensed pharmacy. That's my position, and I'm in favor of that. I want to relieve suffering. If there are derivatives in cannabis that can be used to relieve suffering, I'm in favor of finding it. Let's let the FDA do their studies. Let's get things approved. But let's do it through the medical process with clear written prescriptions for dosages that are clear and obtained from a pharmacy. That's my position.
In response to the last question, I wanted to read part of an opinion written by Hugo Black pertaining to freedom from religion. What he said in Everson versus Board of Education in 1974, neither can force nor influence a person to go to or remain away from church against his will, or force him to profess a belief or disbelief in any religion. No person can be punished for entertaining or professing religious beliefs or disbeliefs for church attendance or non-attendance. James Madison said very clearly, the preeminent author of our Constitution, that the separation of church and state means freedom from religion, that the government does not belong in our own set of beliefs that we need to discover and develop for ourselves. And going now to the question, medical marijuana is, in my view, an example of not listening to our people. Other states have a proven track record of having success with medical marijuana. It has the potential to increase funding for education, which we desperately need. I have talked with several people throughout this campaign about the importance of medical marijuana. I had a meet and greet specifically on that topic, and I heard a very heart-rending story from one of our veterans who talked about medical marijuana as the only effective means that he had to fight his PTSD. I also have talked with opioid addicts who have said that their hope for kicking the habit has been medical marijuana. It is also much cheaper than our pharmaceutical companies are selling us ineffective drugs to treat the same conditions for, whereas medical marijuana has been shown to be successful. I fully support it. I think it's good for our people.
Thank you for your responses. Our next question. Compared to the states surrounding us, Idaho has the highest incarceration rate with the lowest rate of violent crime. Nearly 75% of our prisoners are serving time for nonviolent crimes. According to the Idaho Department of Correction, Idaho is currently paying almost $70 per day for each Idaho inmate being held in Texas prisons. Some estimates claim this could cost Idaho taxpayers as much as $17 million. If elected, how would you address this issue?
I think this goes back to investing in our people. First and foremost, we need to invest in the education, the mental health, the early education of our students. We need to give you a bright future with college. That's the way to keep people out of prison, to keep people on positive tracks, on the positive approach to life, as opposed to falling into a sense of shame and suicide. And crime. Our prisons are filled with nonviolent offenders. We need to deal with that. We need to look at that and keep our prisons for violent offenders. And we need to have a rehab program so that people who have been in prison can be rehabilitated and have successful lives afterward. And I think that $500 million for this new prison that is being discussed would be a shame, because that would take away funding from the places that really affect people's future, including our students. We need to look at the means to give people a second chance before they, and not imprison them for nonviolent crimes. We can have other means to punish people who have gotten into trouble, and let's really focus on helping people, not throwing away the key and locking them up. That doesn't help anyone. I think it's a serious problem, and we need to look at it, but I think one of the things we could do, for instance, we have a lot of tax exemptions and special interests being represented in our legislature. We have $2 billion we could save if we got rid of the sales tax exemptions for special interests. We could use that money to figure out the way to help people have a brighter future, and if they're arrested and charged and convicted, we could figure out a way not to send them to prison and help them get back on their feet.
First, I would say that one of the things we need to do is get rid of many of our mandatory minimum sentences. In that sense, I agree with Pat. We don't need to build a $500 million new prison. We've got to figure out a better way to handle that. And getting rid of our mandatory minimum sentences for many of our drug offenses would be important. Let's let our judges make decisions based on what they know about the case and what they know about the people. We need to put the power of incarceration back in the hands of the judges, where it belongs. I also favor, we need to look carefully at what we're doing in terms of training and retraining and mental health crisis centers, and that whole area needs to be looked at carefully. What are we doing in our prisons to help prisoners re-enter society with a legitimate leg up, with an opportunity to be productive in society? All of those things need to be looked at, but certainly one of the most important and pressing issues is to get rid of mandatory minimum sentences.
Thank you for your responses. For our final question, if elected to office, what would be your first priority and what makes you uniquely qualified to accomplish this goal? Candidate Marshall, you may begin.
Well, my first priority would be to bring my experience to the legislative task. There hasn't been one question about economic freedom tonight. There hasn't been one question about agriculture tonight. There hasn't been one question about a lot of the pressing concerns about our infrastructure issues here in Idaho. I think I bring to the legislature a broad experience that will be enormously important in the legislative process. There are more issues than just the social agenda issues that we've discussed here tonight. Our farmers desperately need to be encouraged and protected from overregulation. We need to make certain that we're recharging the aquifer and doing the things that farmers want to do to maintain the resources that are absolutely necessary for them to produce. We need to make sure that the environment for small businesses is conducive to creativity and genius and reaping the benefits of their own labors. We do need to take care of our roads and our bridges in Idaho. We got to figure out how to do that. There's absolutely no question we need to pay teachers more, certainly starting salaries for teachers. I taught young people who were going to be teachers in the public school system, and most of our Idaho students whom I taught left the state of Idaho for jobs, or they simply decided they were not going to go into the field of education. One of the most gifted teachers I ever taught works in business. He just said, I can't do it. I'm not going to go into education. We need to attract and retain gifted, passionate teachers who want students to learn and to be empowered by knowledge. All across all of these issues, folks, I bring to this legislative process broad experience in many of those things. I've been in agriculture, I've been in business, I've taught, I've been an administrator. I bring a wealth of experience to this task in many areas that Pat simply doesn't have the experience at all.
I want to focus on three words that Mr. Marshall said first. Government suppresses genius. Why would someone be running for the legislature to be a representative in our government if his foundational belief is that government suppresses genius? My viewpoint is that government should be used to encourage genius and help it come to the surface so that it can flourish and help us solve our problems in Idaho. If we have proper investing in education and healthcare, students such as yourselves, you won't have to worry about whether you can go to the doctor. You won't have to worry so much about whether you can afford to go to education. Look at the College of Eastern Idaho. That has opened up so many doors for our students, and that was because of all of us voting with that supermajority and making the College of Eastern Idaho possible. We need to expand our vision, not shrink and talk about balancing the budget. While fiscal responsibility is what I believe with all my heart, we can do it creatively by expanding our tax base, by making our people more productive, by having the workers that we need with this climate of low unemployment, with 20% of people in our district, District 30, have 2 to 3 jobs. 10% don't have any health care coverage at all. In District 30, only 30% of the populace has a 4-year degree. That shows to me a very severe opportunity gap. We need to close that gap, give our people hope. With creativity, we don't have to be talking about what we can't do. We need to be talking about what we can do. Our first priority has to be education, has to be Medicaid expansion. It also has to be change. We need to change from the politics of doing it the same way, the politics of cruelty, which is the outcome of not doing anything to address Medicaid expansion, of not providing our kids with the scholarships that they've qualified for, of not making education excellence our priority. We need to do everything we can to help our students succeed, help every Idahoan succeed, to give every Idahoan a fair chance at reaching his or her potential. Thank you so much. I'll be honored to receive your vote.
Thank you, candidates. This concludes our question and answer period. I will now turn the time back to our Master of Ceremonies, McKenna Lewis, for closing remarks.
Thank you all for coming to the debate tonight. The candidates will be available in the Cyber Hall just outside the auditorium after the debate to answer questions you may have. Make sure to go and vote on November 6th from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you are unsure where to vote, go to idahovotes.gov. Thank you and have a good night.